Now, I've brought Maulik in. He's a user experience expert from our product group because I also want to speak about financial wellness. And Maulik has been working a fair bit on financial wellness. From the advisor survey, we saw that financial wellness is definitely an area that is on everyone's radar. And they're expanding their services in order to accommodate this, to make sure that they're covering off all the bases. And so I would like to sort of speak a bit about this idea of expanding services to be now we're in an era where advisors are becoming generalists because they feel that there's an expectation for them to be able to provide so much more than just a traditional investment management or with a bit of financial planning. Mm-hmm. So Dan, what would your take be, and how do you feel advisors are, if there's anything that you witnessed in the market, or if you have any opinions on how they should try to approach this new era of trying to provide these all-encompassing services?
So it depends on the advisor, depends on the client. But my view is that if you're dealing with clients with complex situations, you actually should not, as an advisor, try or expect that you're going to be able to provide the highest level of advice. So you talk about specialists versus generalists. I think very often the model is that as an advisor, you're a little bit like a family doctor, right? You have a good level of proficiency and knowledge on all of the important areas. But where there is a complex issue, you send, the patient to see a specialist. Same thing here, whether it be charitable giving, tax planning, multi-generational giving, whatever it is, right? I think that it's going to be very challenging as an advisor if you don't have an arsenal of specialists. If you're dealing with kind of sophisticated clients with sophisticated situations, simple clients, fine, no problem. But I think many advisors who deal with kind of higher net worth clients, they just should not be expected to be able to provide all the very best advice in their own.
I completely agree with that. And to your point about passing it on to specialists, I feel that we now have the tools where it's possible to connect with specialists regardless of where they are.
100%. And I think it's a very good analogy, because the way we are building our financial wellness product is really around the client experience. And in healthcare, what we've learned is that when the caregivers have a 360-degree view of their patient, when they know everything that's going on, when all the specialists know everything that's going on with the patient, the outcome for the patient is way better than when only just one specialist or caregiver is aware of what's going on. And that's what we want to bring to our clients' financial lives. And that's really what wellness is about, right? It's not really just about, like you said, Lubna, investment management or your banking, but it's really the freedom for you to make your life choices. And what we want to do is we want to enable the advisor to have this 360 information about the client, not just about their banking, but about their health, right? Enough knowledge about their health so that they have the freedom to make the choice that they want to do.
If I can just jump in.
Of course.
I think the parallel of, of a doctor and specialist is kind of quite apt, but with a caveat. Typically we go to a doctor, we're sent to a specialist, off we go, right? The specialist sees us, then writes a report, our doctor gets our report. And that may be fine in many cases. But come back to the financial situation. There are cases where if a client really trusts their advisor, they want their advisor to be in that meeting. They want their advisor to be there beside them, talking about a complex problem, weighing in, asking questions. And so I just think that you need to be clear. If you are going to be bringing somebody else in, do you delegate it entirely, or do you actually have you or maybe a member of your team there participating in the meeting?
Absolutely. And that goes back to, I suppose, different teams would have different approaches. There may be some who want to be completely involved in the process, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to, this is our client, we're bringing in this other person to help with this specialized need, but we want to be a part of the process. We want to make sure that we're there supporting the whole way. And there might be others who feel comfortable saying, okay, you know what, I've made introductions and I'm going to sort of hand it off. And so again, that is, to your point, Dan, different needs, different situations, different clients. The other really interesting thing about financial wellness is, and we've been speaking about this, Dan, is that it's going to that human element. There's empathy here. It's not just about numbers anymore. It's not just about portfolio management anymore, but it's really about seeing a person on the other side and meeting their needs, whatever those needs may be. And they're, of course, different. I've had someone recently tell me that they feel they believe they're the sandwich generation, which is that they have older parents that they take care of and also younger kids, right? So they feel like they're in the middle. And that individual, of course, is going to have different needs than someone in their 30s who may be single, let's say, right? And so how do you cater to these different individuals? And I feel that is the question that needs to be answered. And financial wellness is a big part of that, where it encompasses things such as elder care and debt management. And then we were speaking about financial literacy earlier, and that's another area as well, where educating consumers so that they can make the best informed decisions. Now, I'm curious to hear from you, Dan, about if you've, because you work in the fintech space or because of your close acquaintances there, have you seen any movement in terms of new products that are being introduced to help accommodate these needs that are emerging?
So the answer is absolutely, right? Let's think about the number one question that most clients have when it comes to their financial advisor. Not all, but most clients, their question is, will I be okay? Now, in some cases, they've got so much money, they don't worry about themselves. They've got enough money for them and their kids and their grandkids, fine. That's not the norm. Most clients, their number one question is, am I going to be okay? That's where a financial plan can kind of say, okay, here's the path to your hitting your goals. But then what really matters is not just the initial plan, it's how you track progress against it. And one of the things that when we've had a hot market, right, all of a sudden you're ahead of plan. And so a client may say, fabulous, great, don't have to worry about saving this year, or I can buy that new Porsche. And that's where, of course, you need to set expectations. By the way, there are times you're going to be above plan. There are times you're going to be below plan. What we need to do is, by the way, the plan isn't just one line. It's a line on an upper and a lower band. And what's important is that you stay within that band. And that's a critical conversation because it creates peace of mind. It has clients feel they're in control of their futures. That's the most important thing an advisor can provide to clients, feeling they are in control of hitting their goals. So let's come back to technology. What technology today, and we're seeing it emerge, is able to provide advisors with kind of real-time updates. Here's where your client is today. So you go into a phone call, and let's suppose you've had a big hit in the market, right? You're able to real-time before the call or before a meeting, be able to call up exactly where is a client relative to their goals. And that can be really reassuring to say, look, yes, the market, we've had a tough week, we've had a tough month, but guess what? You're still in the band. You're still on track to hit your goal.
That's, it's funny that you say, am I okay? Because that is the line that I have heard a million times now, because it's what we pretty much keep asking is that when it comes to this new generation, and particularly with wealth transfers and with more empowered female clients, they're not as focused on the numbers as their male counterparts were. They are focused on the am I okay portion. And I saw Maulik smiling because he's heard this many times as well. So Maulik, what is your take on this?
I was smiling throughout this conversation because it resonates with me particularly because our app, our financial wellness app, it's really built on that premise to answer that question: Am I okay? Am I okay to achieve my life goals, to send my kids to education, to take care of my parents? The entire premise of our app is to help the end client, right? The clients, the consumers like you and me. Yes, the advisors are at the center of that relationship to enable that conversation, but we are really focusing on what is the ultimate end client experience that they want to see. And it's that one question that they want to answer: Am I okay today? Every time I have that conversation with my advisor, I want to see that. I want to know that. And I 100% agree with you, Dan. It's not a straight line. It's a band. It's a trajectory, right? And there'll be ups and downs, and that's the conversation. And part of what we're doing is to enable that conversation. We are infusing advice at the right time, right? Whenever there's a client event, for example, the client is about to have a child or they've had a child, but we want to infuse it with advice to say, you know what, you should think about and consider opening an RESP. Yeah. Things like those, right? And those are the kind of advice in the moment that's going to make them feel confident, feel that like they're in control, to Dan's point about their future. So I'm really passionate about this, and I really think we've got the best product in the market.
So if I can just follow up on that for a moment. So every client's different, right? We know that. So some clients, they worry, yes, am I going to be okay? The ones that are, have done better, maybe they built a business, perhaps there's family wealth, maybe they, run a large company. They're no longer worried about necessarily, am I going to be okay? Yeah, I've got lots of money, I know. However, are my kids going to be okay? Are my kids going to be okay, both in terms of their financial situation, but also their values and their behavior? One of the things, it's striking how many successful entrepreneurs worry about, are my kids going to feel entitled? Are they going to have the same values? So there's no perfect solution, but one of the things we know that can help is if at a very early age, the family members, the kids of your clients, have an opportunity to start having conversations, but not with their parents, because no 17, 16, 18-year-old wants to hear from their parents. Not necessarily with their parent's advisor, because you got a generational gap, plus it's their parent advisor. What they want to hear from often is somebody who is closer to their peers. So that's where I've seen some cases, there's a team member who's in his or her 20s, who actually, part of their role is having early conversations with, the progeny of their best clients, starting to talk about financial challenges and decisions and making a budget and so on and so forth. But what does that do? Does a couple of things. One, it deepens the relationship with the client, because now you're doing something that is absolutely a hot button for the client. They didn't ask for it. You've offered it. Mm-hmm. So you've demonstrated initiative. But the other thing is, every client, every advisor is worried about, okay, what happens if my best client, passes away? And we've all seen stories where, they're kind of the accounts quickly go elsewhere, where what you do is you solidify the relationships with the spouse and the kids early so that you have to worry less about that.
I completely agree with that. And I feel that goal planning, and especially when we speak about the younger generation, that's where that is key, where you're planning for a particular goal, whether it be a purchase of a car, for instance, or, I want to hit this X investment amount in my portfolio. And tracking is key there. So having something intuitive where you can go in and you can say, okay, here's my goal. It's very nicely laid out, good visual. I can see what it is, and I can see how far along I am. And I'm completely on board with the idea of these younger team members, because we have to keep in mind that advisors are humans as well. And so they also have certain habits that they fall into. Particularly some of the older advisors, they may not be as comfortable with all this new technology, right? They're like, listen, I've ran this business for decades this way, and I've done quite well, and I want to continue to do the way I want to do it. And I feel that is an acceptable answer. And it especially works out really well when you do have those younger people on your team who are willing to leverage that technology to streamline things in the background so that these advisors can continue to run the business the way that they feel they want to. And so I feel that it's a bit of a mix. There's harmony here that comes into play. And when we speak about financial wellness, I feel that, and Dan, you brought this up, is that it's a band, and tracking for me is the key part, and that's where you need to have the right technology, and that's where all these fintechs come in, because usually they come up with like really sleek designs and solutions, and then they might get bought out. There might be a partnership where they lend that technology out, and it is all about meeting the needs of people that have different time horizons, right? That are at different stages of their lives.
Right. So talking about new technology, there's a whole proliferation of them. One of the things we're starting to see more utilization of is, essentially online repositories of all of our information. So because one of the things we've all seen it happen, someone passes away and their finances are a mess, right? Mm-hmm. They're all over the place. Their passwords aren't saved. Like, it can be a friggin' nightmare. And so one of the things that I've seen advisors do is be proactive about saying to clients, look, I just had a client pass away, and unfortunately, in addition to passing away, their financial affairs were not in order, and it ended up being really challenging for their family. So I'd like to talk about what we can do to ensure that your finances are, consolidated in a good state. And so that kind of a conversation has huge benefits in terms of the client being better off, hitting a hot button. Most clients say, oh, of course, makes sense. But again, what are you signaling as an advisor? There's nothing in it for you. You don't make more money by doing this. So what clients all of a sudden recognize, they're just reminded, yes, this advisor really is somebody who is motivated first and foremost by my interests, someone who I can kind of really, really trust.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. It brings up an example that I've seen implemented by a private bank, so not available to everybody, but only available to the wealthiest, is implementing a vault. And the technology is available to do that, where a client can go in and enter all of their credentials across their most private and their most important finances, right? And make that information available to their loved ones when they pass away. So it's definitely out there, but it's not available to the masses just yet.
Let me point out just on that something else that advisors can do to deepen relationships, to advance, make clients better off, and that is have one of the hardest conversations that an advisor can have with many clients. And that is to talk to their clients about sharing with, in some cases, their spouse, but often their kids, what their financial situation is. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of data on this. There's lots of research that one of the things that destroys families is when, somebody passes away, the will gets read, and there are surprises. And that can create strife and disharmony and a really negative outcome. And now, bad news may still be bad news, right, after the fact. But we know that by being honest and upfront and sharing kind of the plans and expectations, sometimes you just confirm what your kids already know. In other cases, there are going to be surprises. So it makes so much sense. And yet we know many people, especially business owners that are used to control, are reluctant to do that. They're reluctant because, they're giving up control, right? Or maybe there will be unpleasant conversations. That's where an advisor can play a pivotal role. And I remember having a conversation with a very successful advisor in the U.S. running a $25 billion, that's billion with a B, and that's U.S. dollars, so real money. And he said, one of the things that I do is that I say to my clients, look, we need to have this conversation. I'm happy to work with you, chair the meeting, walk people through the process. By the way, we don't have to talk about everything. Here's an agenda. You identify the things you feel comfortable talking about. And so you still maintain some control, but you start bringing your family members, along with it so that they are less likely to be surprised, at some future point.
That's very true. And I feel that, it's sort of the nature of that business is having difficult conversations. And obviously, when it comes to finances, parents can be very reluctant to share certain information with their children. But it is something that does need to be done, particularly for the reasons that you mentioned, Dan, where, unfortunately, sometimes unexpected tragedies do strike. And it can be a bit of a mess if things are not in order. And of course, if it's unexpected, then there's a good chance that things are not in order. And so being upfront and honest about these conversations is really important. I do want to shift it slightly because another part of this whole area of financial wellness is savings. And I look at the stats in Canada, I look at the stats in the US, and it's not the best picture. Right. Where, I keep hearing from the US, for instance, I keep hearing that most people are not even able to handle a $500 right. emergency. And that's very unfortunate. But there are programs that right. are trying to improve these numbers and right. to help these individuals.
So, absolutely. So, yes, there are people who, unfortunately, are close to the margin. And that's a real issue, and it creates all kinds of challenges and stressors and so on. I wouldn't say that's typically the profile of the kind of client most advisors deal with. That's just the reality. But to your point about savings, I recently read a really interesting article in Barron's. So, there is a kind of a broad perception that millennials are wastrels, they're kind of living the high life, and boomers were the really super responsible savers. So what's interesting is that the research is that millennials in the US have saved a higher percentage of their retirement needs than boomers have. Now, maybe boomers, you could say, well, they're later on, they don't need the savings, some of them have already retired. But why is that? And it's attributed to one thing in particular. So starting about 20 years ago, there was an innovation around 401ks, which in the US are essentially company savings plans. And it was initiated by Richard Thaler, who recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics. He teaches at the University of Chicago, addressing the issue of savings. And the traditional savings rate was about 3% of your income, not high enough. And by making a couple of changes, they were able to, that have now been embedded into savings plans, they were able to take 3% to 13.5% to quadruple it, called Save More Tomorrow. And it's all about a couple of things, defaults. So changing what the norm is. So historically, when you sign up, when you do payroll, they say, okay, you want to save 3%, fine, check here. What happens if you say you want to save 6%? You can reduce and increase it. Most people say, sure, fine, check here. Just by changing the default, you change behavior. But then critically, what they also did is said, now, would you be interested on your next paycheck, pay increase, allocating half of it or 60% of it to increase your savings? Most people say, yes, that's our norm here. And by changing the default and by deferring the commitment. So the commitment is, we're not asking you to save more today. It's out of your future increases. They were able to quadruple savings rates from 3.5% to 13.5%. So those are the kinds of things that we now have levers to move. And by doing things like thinking about how do we automate savings, for example, how do we make savings something that, if you go way back to David Chilton, the wealthy barber, one of his principal precepts was pay yourself first. And so there are some simple tools. We talk about new things, fintech. There are some things that have been around for a long time. All we have to do is execute them, help clients execute them, and clients will be better off.
I am constantly amazed by the things that default can accomplish. It's quite powerful. Now, on this topic of savings, Maulik, do you have any thoughts?
I do have some thoughts on what's available today, right? To your point around the power of defaults, that there's many financial institutions today, and these are not neobanks, they've been around for a while, that provide solutions to enable you to save these. And they do it by default, taking away right from your paycheck, to Dan's point. But it's really can they impose that default on you as a client? What is it going to need it for them to do that in your best interest? And I think that's where, in my mind, at least, the financial wellness picture comes in, where earlier you spoke about the client engagement model, whether it's hybrid, whether it's self-serve. So to me, it's a spectrum. And in that self-serve spectrum, or for at least the folks who cannot, quote unquote, afford an advisor, these FIs, they have the tools to do it. They have the tools to enable clients to increase their savings, and really, financial wellness, financial planning is a means to do that.
So look, there are a couple of solutions. There's no perfect solution, but one of them is framing it in terms of saying, here's what most people do. So as soon as you say, here's what most people in your situations do, most people say, okay, well, if that's what most people in my situation do, I should do it as well. But the other thing is opt-in compared to opt-out. So, like the data is very clear that, and Dan Ariely at Duke has done research on commitment to agree to organ transplants in the event of an accident. Looks at countries like Germany, we're at 3%, Austria, 99%. Right? Similar shifts, Netherlands and Belgium. How is that possible? Opt-in versus opt-out. So the high organ donation countries are the ones where automatically you're signed up to, commit to, if there's an accident, organ donation, unless you opt out. The other model, which is what we have in the US and Canada, by the way, is an opt-in model where we aren't committed to organ donation unless we opt in. And so that model applies to so many things. So for example, you can build an opt-out model. Here's what most people in your situation are doing. They're committing to commit X% of their salary. Would you like to do that? If not, click here, opt out, but otherwise that's what we'll do.
Right.
Yeah. And if I can add to that very quickly, I'm going to bring it back to wealth management and technology, the power of defaults. One example I have from earlier, we were talking about a client portal, and many advisors are reluctant to offer a client portal to their clients because they think it's going to take away the value that they offer. Whereas in reality, when you give clients access to whether it's their plan or whether it's their investment portfolio, by default, the result is actually it deepens the engagement. It deepens the relationship with the advisor and the client, because now the conversation is not around, hey, here is how you did, but it's around, okay, what can we do better now, right?
Now let's think about that client portal. What else could we do? So we know that in many cases, people say, all right, if you have any questions, here's our FAQ. People hate FAQs, right? They're kludgy, they're uncomfortable. Suppose we created just kind of a box where you could put your question in. No matter what the question is, you put your question in, you get the answer to your question, right? That's what we're doing in this course I mentioned earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Students don't have to scroll through lecture notes. They can ask the question, they get an answer. So two things happen. One, clients are going to ask more questions because it becomes easier. But now the advisor can actually monitor what questions are being asked. And so as a result, by making it easy for clients to ask questions, things that are below the surface they may be worried about, they may be reluctant to talk to their advisor about, now you're able to bring to the surface and have a conversation about.
That is very true. So you can pretty much track trends in a certain way of. So if I'm thinking about RSP season, for instance, suddenly all these people are asking about their contribution limits or their contribution room. And perhaps you can even get a list generated of who's asking about this. And now you can reach out to them and be like, hey, what's going on? Did you want to contribute? Yeah. Do you have any questions about it? So I feel like those could be additional touch points. It can be a way for the advisor to stay engaged while also giving the client a bit of room to sort of explore things on their own. Definitely. Now, before we wrap up, Maulik, you've been speaking about the financial wellness product that I know you're very excited about. So do you want to give us a few, I suppose, a few highlights of it that you feel are very exciting and that are definitely meeting the market needs?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things that we've done with the product is it's really, we are always looking at the client as the center of what we build, right? Even though today the users are our advisors, we are making it so easy for the advisors to have the financial planning and the financial wellness conversation with their clients. They can literally work with their clients and build a plan together. That's how easy we are making it. That's one thing I'm really passionate about. The second thing I really like is we touched upon it, the am I okay? Am I okay question. And really the outcome of our plan is literally am I okay indicator. We call it am I okay indicator that tells their client how they are doing against their plan. Those are the two really important things that I'm super excited and super pumped up about. And the third thing I'm going to say is this is what we plan to build for the next couple of years is really going back to that wellness part, which is the 360-degree view of the client, right? To have a holistic conversation. And this came up in the voice of the advisor is advisors want to deepen their relationship with their clients by providing holistic service. And to enable that, we want them to have that 360-degree view, everything that the client has. So those are the three things I'm super, super excited about.